So the title of my talk, Lithops and Cultivation, From Ed Storms to Livingstone's Nursery. It all started 30 years ago. So here are the players. Ed Storms, Ruth Storms, his wife, Jean Joseph, not yet my husband, and me, Jane Evans. In 1987, Jean attended the CSSA convention in Tempe. He was hoping to hear Ed Storms talk about lithops. Unfortunately, Ed died suddenly that week, quite unexpectedly. I must admit, I'm a little bit anxious about this talk. The convention was June 21st through the 26th, 1987. And it was in Tempe, not far from here at all. Ed was to be a speaker at the convention speaking about lithops. Ed was 62 years old. I'm going to talk to you about lithops, and I'm 62 years old. I hope that's where all the similarities lie. That's it. I want them to stop right there. Ed Storms was a fighter pilot in World War II. He was a professional photographer and an artist. He was a sculptor. Someone seeing this sculpture of his said, "That looks like a lithops." Ed said, "What's a lithops?" According to his wife Ruth, when he saw a lithops, it blew his mind. He started growing lithops in a big way. And many consider Ed Storms to be the man that put lithops on the plant map in the United States. He stopped sculpting and started growing lithops. Soon after Ed's death, we were told that a nursery was going to buy the lithops and use them for dish garden plants to sell to places like Kmart and other chain garden centers. As plant people, Jean and I were bummed out. We had heard of Ed's collection, and I had even potted up his plants when I volunteered at the Boyce Thompson Arboretum before their plant sales. We knew these plants were special, and the idea of them going to generic dish garden deaths was not a happy thought. A few weeks later, we learned that the deal had fallen through, and Ruth Storms, Ed's widow, was going to sell them. Ruth is pictured on the right, Ed's aunt, Auntie, is in the middle, and one of their nursery workers, Roberta, is on the opposite of the left. Yeah, right. My right, your left. Plants for the Southwest was 1 year old. We had no money to speak of, and I was still running the flower shop on the nursery property. You'll understand this part if you read my bio. I believe being young and with little business experience gave us an advantage. We wanted to buy the plants, so we just asked Ruth if we could buy them. As luck would have it, my house was in escrow, and it was ready to close in 2 weeks. Ruth didn't know us from the man in the moon, but she trusted us and let us buy the collection on a promise. Jean and our friend Scott drove to Azle, Texas to size up the job of moving all the plants, and a lifetime friendship with Ruth developed. Thinking Jean was just going to Azle to see what needed to be arranged, imagine my surprise when he called and he said he was hiring a semi-trailer truck to deliver the plants in a couple of days. In a mad dash at the nursery, I moved every plant I could to try and make room. Jean kept calling me and saying, "You need to make more room." And I'd say, "I've moved everything." "No, you need to make more room," he'd say. I thought I was. On July 23rd, 1987, a 48-foot tractor trailer arrived at Plants for the Southwest, and when the doors opened, I thought I would die. The trailer was packed front to back. It had 11 shelves high, full of lithops and mesems, all planted in Rubbermaid containers. It was so full that Jean had to load the final trays into his old Chevy pickup truck. The plants arrived in Tucson on what turned out to be the hottest day of the summer. It was 109 degrees. We had all of our plant friends lined up to help unload. including Mark Dimmitt, Greg Starr, Chuck Hansen, Richard Felger, Bill Feldman, and at least 10 others that all helped throughout the day. If you look at this picture, you may see a younger version of Mark Dimmitt. We all were younger once. We stashed lithops everywhere. And it wasn't until that fall that we built a 2,400 square foot house to hold the bulk of the collection. Ed Storm's Lithops and Mesem Nursery turned into Livingstone's nursery. You can see in this picture, in the upper right-hand corner, all of the Rubbermaid containers filled with lithops. Then, slowly, we transplanted them into different trays. On the left-hand side, you'll see these were tall 4-inch pots that Ed had started thousands and thousands and thousands of seedlings in. So we had to build space for both of them. Now, today, you can see no more Rubbermaid containers, thank goodness, but we don't even grow them in trays anymore. We've found them to be most efficiently grown in 4 by 4-inch pots, so we grow them in 4 by 4s. And our seedling house now has many, many different seedlings, not as many thousands. Once the dust settled, we were able to put together a collection of all the lithops types we had and donate them to the Boyce Thompson Arboretum in Superior. Ruth made the trip out to be part of the dedication of the new lithops collection. So you'll see Jean, Ruth, myself, and then we got photobombed by Chuck. So that's how Livingstone's nursery started. And now we're going to totally change gears and get down to the nitty-gritty of growing lithops. So lithops culture. One of the first things I hear from people when they see lithops is, oh, I've killed a bunch of those. I don't try them anymore. I've heard that just in the last 2 days. I'd like to have that statement change and turn into one where people say, oh, I just love those plants, and now that I know how to grow them, I want more. The first thing people ask me is, how do you water lithops? I'm often asked for my technique. I'm asked for a recipe. How do you grow them? How do you water them? As you will learn from listening to this talk, I don't believe in a magic formula. Not for lithops or any plants. You must learn about the plants, what they need, what they require, and what you need to provide for them. Plants are living things, and they require attention. If you look at your plants closely, after a time you'll be able to tell when something's amiss. I could take the easy way out, and you guys could all take a nap, and I could just say, this is a 3-minute talk, and I water them lightly once a week year-round, and there you go. That's how I take care of them. That works for me in Tucson, but I doubt that it would work for you wherever you live. My goal is to give you some good plant information so you can go back to your plants and have success by applying your new knowledge. So to begin, I want to tell you that I have all of my 30 years experience growing lithops in Tucson, Arizona. Tucson, as you now know because of Mark's great talk, is in the Sonoran Desert. We're about 100 miles south of where you sit today. We traditionally receive half our rainfall, which is annually 11 to 12 inches, in the fall and the winter, and the other half in the summer during what we affectionately call our monsoon season. In the past, I would have told you we usually have a dozen freezes a winter. Our normal freezes have had a low of about 28 degrees. I would have also told you that we get hot in the summer, with our highest temperatures in June. I would have told you that we have many days over 100 degrees, and perhaps a week or so over 105. All of that information is changing with climate change. This past winter, we had 1 freeze, and at the nursery, we had a low of 31 degrees. This summer, we have been breaking records right and left. June 20th, 21st, and 22nd were all record highs. In addition to being record highs, they were 3 days over 115. I'm hopeful that this temperature will not be the new normal because I can't take it. I used to function at a slow pace when the temperatures got up to 105, and after that it was all downhill. Now, not only is it hell to work in this kind of heat, it's very difficult to watch the plants suffer, as well as all the birds and the animals. So with all that bit of cheerful information, I want to tell you today should be used as good information that you can digest and then apply to your individual growing conditions. I'll do my best to help you understand how the plants grow and what their needs are. Just remember, there's not a magic formula to growing lithops. You as the grower have the responsibility to learn about them and take this knowledge with you to help your plants thrive. My hope is that you will take away information you can use to grow lithops and all the mesons as well as other plants in your collection. So let's talk about lithops. I call lithops cool season growers. You're going to hear over and over again that they're winter growers, and I tell you they're not. They're cool season growers. You may think I'm splitting hairs, but I don't think I am. The weather in Tucson in October, when lithops start growing, is nothing like the weather in December and January, or what you would actually call winter. They start growing with the day length shortening and the nighttime temperatures dropping into the delightful 60s. They continue growing until the days get long and the temperatures consistently are above 95 to 100 degrees. These are temperatures I watch for. I don't have any scientific evidence that these exact temperatures are what they need, but this is when I observe, I see the temperatures change, and I see the lithops change. In order to understand lithops and how they grow and how you should take care of them, you need to understand their life cycle. They flower, they split, the leaves reabsorb, new bodies appear, summer comes, and they stop growing. I will begin starting with fall, because to me, I see growth starting when the flower buds form. In Tucson, this begins in late October and continues to early December. Once I see flower buds forming on the plants, it registers to me they're beginning to grow. And stop and think about it just for a minute. Think about other plants. Take fruit trees, for example. They're dormant all winter, and then what do? They start flowering. They're telling you they're breaking dormancy. Same thing with lithops. I see the flower buds. I realize they're beginning to grow. This is one of the few times in the yearly growing cycle of lithops that I water somewhat heavily. And I say somewhat heavily because I never drench lithops. Never. When I water them somewhat heavily, that means for me in Tucson, the water goes about halfway into the soil. I do this once when I see the flower buds form. I never water lithops so water runs out the bottom of the pot. The next week I water about the same rate, but this time I add fertilizer. I use an all-purpose fertilizer, 20-20-20, and I use it about half strength. And we'll talk a little bit about fertilizer later. After I do my initial heavier watering, and then the next week the fertilizer watering, I water once a week to keep the soil lightly moist, never soggy and wet, all around the root ball, which in our pot means the water goes about 1 to 2 inches deep into the soil. So now I'll diverge just slightly to tell you that lithops have two main flower colors. They have white and yellow. You can see some white and yellow, and then there's this nice little variety that gives you some white and yellow. It's one of the things I find fascinating about lithops. When they flower, to me it's so cool because the flowers open and close every day. As they open, the following day the petals start growing. So you start with a nice tight flower, and the flower starts getting bigger and bigger, and pretty soon you can't even see the lithops underneath the flowers anymore. It's also interesting to me that you can have one plant and it's in many different forms of flowering. We see tight buds, we see some that are just getting ready to open, and the ones on the top have already opened for several days. And I guess maybe I'm easily amused, but I think that's kind of interesting. So I just thought it would be nice for you to see some of the flower colors. We have one variant that I'm aware of, and this came from Ed Storms. This is the one variant color. It's Lithops verruculosa, and he named it the Rose of Texas. I also like this picture because you can see the copious amounts of pollen that are produced on these flowers. After they finish flowering, you'll have the remnant threads of the flower on the plant, and then you'll have fruit starting to set. Okay, now we're back to watering. The flower's finished, the fruit's set. I watered somewhat heavily. I continue this watering routine once a week until I start seeing the plant split. So when the split is when I have the new bodies emerging. Well, let's see. I have, oops, that's not it. I have the new bodies emerging out of the center of the old leaves. So human nature, this is when I run into people at the nursery and they ask me about them, this is usually when I find out that they lose their plants. Human nature says, isn't this cool? I made it through flowering, I have the plants, look at them, they're getting ready to grow, they must need water. The reality is, they don't need much water now because the roots are essentially going dormant. The new leaves emerging from the center of that plant are going to take all of their moisture and nutrients from last year's leaves. So those leaves are going to dry up. And it's going to take a while because those old leaves are super succulent and they have to be absorbed. They're going to dry up into a dry, papery sheath. So here's the deal, and this is how I think people lose them. The roots might be essentially dormant, but they shouldn't be ignored and allowed to go bone dry. In the literature, this is a time when you hear the unfortunate statement, give your plants a dry rest. If you take it literally, that means don't water them. Well, I say forget it. Don't listen to that statement. You need to water these plants. So now I have to ask you, this is a dangerous thing to ask you to do because we just had lunch, but did anybody warn you this was going to be an interactive talk? In order for you to visualize what I'm about to say, it's going to help if you close your eyes. I know this will freak many of you out, especially if you have the XY chromosomes. Just be glad I didn't start this talk with 3 ohms so that we could all get centered. That's right. Okay, you've seen this picture, now you need to close your eyes. It'll help. It'll help you with success growing your plants, I'm sure. You have to think small. You have to think tiny, in fact. Imagine you're a tiny little root hair. Keep that thought. Now imagine what it feels like to be a tiny little root hair in bone dry soil. Just think about it for a minute. How does it feel? The soil is dry. All you can think about is water. It feels horrible, right? You feel like dying, right? Well, welcome to the world of root hairs in the Lithops world when people don't water their plants for weeks or months on end. So what do? The roots are essentially dormant, right? So what do? Well, now you can open your eyes. Now you can open your eyes and think again, and we'll talk a little bit more about plant physiology. Think about plant roots. They anchor the plants into the soil. They take up water so the plant can stay alive. Roots are really important. They're really important to all sorts of plants, but they're really important to Lithops too. We need to take a lot of care to keep them alive. Sorry, somehow I got ahead. You'll see in this picture that the Lithops roots, there are larger roots, and then there are smaller roots. And then there are little tiny root hairs which you can't see with the naked eye. All of this looks like a Lithops root, but each part of the root system has its purpose. The root hairs are tiny and they're very important to the function of the root system. When you water your plants, the root hairs are what I like to call the first line of defense. They receive the water and the nutrients and send the signal to the rest of the root system that it's time to start working. Without root hairs, the larger roots don't get this immediate signal until the root hairs have regrown. And root hairs will regrow all the time on roots. So now that you know about root hairs, think about back to having your eyes closed and being in bone-dry soil. You would be a dead root hair if you give your plants a dry rest. So how do you deal with a plant that's essentially dormant but needs to keep its root hairs alive? I deal with this by watering very lightly once a week. I water so the soil has the slightest bit of moisture, just to keep those microscopic root hairs alive. People have a real hard time with this concept. They say, oh, should I use a spray bottle? And I say, no, I don't use a spray bottle. I tell people the water needs to go 1/2 inch to 1 inch deep into the soil to keep the moisture around the roots. You might ask why a spray bottle won't work. Well, maybe it's because my 62-year-old hands have some arthritis, but I don't think so. If I used a spray bottle to try and get water 1/2 inch to 1 inch into the soil, my hand would be dead, and yours probably would too. It takes a long time with a tiny little spray to get the water that deep. You need to use a water breaker on the end of your hose or watering can so you can deliver a nice even spray of water lightly. You want the water to penetrate 1/2 inch to 1 inch into the soil. You're going to have to figure out how you can do this. I water with a hose and a water breaker, and you could say I'm watering as though I try to get the dust off the plants. So I pass over gently 1 or 2, possibly 3 times. You want the water to go just into the surface. By watering this way, you're going to keep a little bit of moisture into the soil so those root hairs never go completely bone dry. If you were to give your plants too heavy a watering at this time, 2 things can happen. One is death by rotting. Many of us probably know that. The other is giving too much water so the new leaves absorb the old leaves and use their roots at the same time, and as a result you get really, really large, fat-leaved lithops. This would be the way you want it to look, so the new heads are emerging and the old heads are being absorbed evenly. So sometimes I've heard this, and it's kind of like the farmers cutting open the tree so the cows can drink the water out of the tree. Some people, when they have lithops with really large second pairs of leaves, they'll take a sharp razor blade and they'll cut them off so that they can have less tissue for the new leaves to shrink. I don't do that, but I know people do it successfully. But that sounds awful to me, because when the leaves are really big and fleshy, it's like flesh. This is the end of the reabsorption. You can see that it's a dry, papery sheath all around those lithops leaves. So once the old leaves are absorbed and the plants are actively growing again, this can be a very short growing period for lithops in Tucson. I once again do my initial heavier watering, then the next week I do a fertilizer watering with a half-strength fertilizer. Because this growth happens late March to early April, I have to pay attention to the weather. In a good year, the plants will get a slightly heavy watering each week for 4 to 6 weeks. And that's a good year, meaning that we don't hit the high 90s in April or even late March. In our new normal, with the temperatures rising, this growth cycle may be cut short. If we have warmer weather than usual with springtime temperatures, I'll have to resume my very light watering sooner than usual. And this year, we had really, really warm temperatures in March and April. So I wasn't able to give them as much water. But as you can see, the new bodies of the freshly split lithops are beautiful. Lithops colors will fade with our intense desert sun and heat. They become damaged with a slight bump on the body. Our hard water leaves water spots on the bodies almost immediately. Look at your plants in the spring when the new bodies are exposed. They really, truly are beautiful. And unfortunately, even though the bodies are beautiful, in this picture you see a slight bump, made a little scar, and we have our hard water deposits. So for us, it's not that easy with the hard water, to see the bodies perfectly. So I am always watching as they're reabsorbing to see that new, fresh growth. This plant, I didn't collect all of the fruit, and by my light frequent watering you can see that some of the seeds fell down into the top dressing, and so it's making its own little nursery plant. Then summer comes, and we know it's really hot in Tucson. You're going to have to gauge this next watering schedule by where you live, but when it's really, really hot, the roots on the lithops once again go essentially dormant when the temperatures consistently stay above 95 to 100. So remember when I had you close your eyes and imagine being a root hair in bone-dry soil in the winter? Well, I'm counting on you to remember that feeling and add on the heat of 100 degrees. Imagine 100 degrees, bone-dry soil. Just don't let the soil go bone-dry. You can just imagine how bad it is. I continue to water my plants once a week using the light spraying method. Once again, I pass over as though I'm trying to get the dust off the plants. My aim is to keep the root hairs alive through the horrible heat, so once the plants can grow again in the fall, the roots will have their first line of defense ready. If you let the soil go bone dry and all the root hairs die off, and then you suddenly start watering the plants, your succulent lithops are sitting on wet soil, trying to grow, not only grow new root hairs, but they're trying to get the roots to start working. So many times I tell people how to water like this, and they say, but my lithops rotted, and I hadn't watered them in months. And that's why. You had no more root hairs left. The plant had to regenerate all the root hairs. That succulent plant body was sitting on top of wet soil. It didn't have time to regrow the root hairs, so the roots couldn't work. And you're right, it did rot. And you hadn't watered it for months. But I believe that's the problem. All of this may sound overwhelming, but if you think about the plants, how they grow and what they need, it really becomes second nature. You'll see a little bit of wrinkling on the plant. A lot of times people really worry about that and they think, oh no, I haven't watered them enough, they're so wrinkled. That little bit of wrinkling is okay. It's not that big a deal. If you keep those root hairs active, they'll be fine. I happen to be a chronic underwatering type of plant person, so maybe that's why it's easy for me to give once a week light watering. If you love to soak plants, and you have three choices. First, grow lithops in such a fast-draining soil that they never sit in wet soil and hope for the best. 2, change your ways. Cut back on the amount of water you give those little jewels. Or 3, choose a different type of plant to grow, one that can take your frequent drenching. If you happen to live in a place where you experience extreme heat like we do in Tucson, here are a couple of things that we've learned over the years. First, lithops in Tucson need extra shade in the summer. We learned this, believe it or not, from a group of Japanese nurserymen that came to the nursery one summer. They looked at our lithops, and because of our extreme heat, the heat makes the lithops stretch a little bit, and they said, you need more shade on your house. And you can see in this picture, at the top of on the top of the house, there is a denser piece of 47% shade, and that's the shade we leave on for the fall through the spring. And then when the temperatures start rising, we add an additional piece of 30% shade on top. It's not ideal because it's lower light, but we have to do it in Tucson or they just get too hot. We also put an extra piece of shade on the side so that the west sun doesn't bake them either. Another thing we learned from visitors from South Africa is that it rarely gets as hot in South Africa as it does in Tucson. So as a result, we need to treat plants differently. One common misconception I hear over and over again is that lithops don't get much rain in South Africa, so they shouldn't need watering once a week. So now I should ask you to close your eyes again and imagine what I'm going to talk about, but I'll spare you this time. If it helps you remember, feel free to close them. One thing that bugs me is when people tell me They read about certain plants, and in nature they say, the plants don't get the water I'm telling them to apply. And this goes way beyond lithops. People tell me this nature comparison water thing about all sorts of plants. Cacti, welwitschia, lithops, aloes, Sonoran desert trees and shrubs. And I try to hide my frustration, but I don't think I'm that good at all the time at hiding my frustration. When we take plants out of their natural habitat, all bets are off. Yes, we do need to pay attention to the temperatures they can tolerate, both high and low. We need to think about how much water to give them and when, and we do need to think about what the climate's like where they come from. But that, to me, is about where the comparison to plants in nature should stop. When we're trying to grow plants in containers or in the ground in a different climate, you have to give the plants what they need in the new environment you're putting them in. In nature, lithops find rocks, nooks, and crannies to grow in. They have contractile roots that can pull themselves down into the ground during dry periods. They grow in places where grass cover them for sun protection. They grow among rocks, and the rocks act like natural mulch, holding water in the native soil for plants to use when they need it. They grow in the native soil in South Africa. This soil, like all native soil, has a natural structure that the plants use to stay rooted and take up water. We're not providing these elements to the plants when we grow them in containers, so we need to act accordingly. When we grow lithops in containers, they're confined to the space in that container. They're dependent on us for moisture, too much or too little. They rely on us for the right amount of light and air movement. So forget checking the paper to see when it rains in South Africa as a guide to watering your lithops. Learn what your plants need and try your best to offer it to them. So what do you need to succeed? These are the things that I think you need to succeed. You need a good soil, you need top dressing, you need water breaker, you need the right container. Oh, sorry. Okay. And I'm going to talk about each one of these. So you need the soil, the top dressing, and the water breaker. Our soil is a very fast draining soil. It's about 50% pumice. If you just can't hold back on the watering, you may need even more than 50% pumice. You can purchase commercial cactus mix, and it should be similar to ours. If you buy a bag labeled cactus mix and it looks like it's going to stay soggy and wet, then add about 50% pumice or perlite to that soil, and then you should have a fast draining soil. We use top dressing on all of our pots. It can be pumice, it can be decorative rock, it can be seashells, it can be aquarium gravel, it can be glass, it can be marbles, it can be anything. It doesn't matter. You just want a nice mulch. The principle is the same whether you're mulching a garden or a plant in a pot. You're covering the surface of the soil so you can try and keep even moisture throughout the soil mass. Without a mulch on top of the soil, all the water will evaporate right off of the surface and leave the soil unevenly dry. This mulch also helps keep those real succulent lithops bodies off the surface of that wet soil when you first water it. As a general rule, we use pots that are about 3 inches deep. In the nursery, most of my plants that I get ready to sell for mail order, I put in what we call 4x4s. These I've planted 3x3 just for display, but generally we use a 4-inch square pot and we plant them 4x4. You have to have drainage in your pot. It's a must. Lithops will not work if you grow them in pots that don't have drainage. I'm sure you can understand why. I consider lithops shallow-rooted plants, so you never want to plant a lithops in a deep pot. And if you think about it, once again, we're talking about root physiology. What makes the soil dry out? If you have wet soil and there are no roots in that soil's going to stay wet because nothing's using it. The reason soil dries out is because the roots are taking it up and they're using it in the plant. So if you have a big deep pot and you get that soil mass wet, that soil's going to stay wet on the bottom and continually wick back up, and the plant will never dry out. I usually like a pot that's between 3 and 4 inches deep. Another thing that's really interesting that I find about lithops is you can call them a companion plant with other lithops. They love being potted together as a group. Here's just a fun decorative container that we use. A friend of ours made it, and I thought it was just screaming to me that it needed to have lithops in it, so that's what I put in it. If you decide that you found this container that you're in love with and you have to plant in it, but it's a little too shallow, what we've done here is we've built up the soil, and then we've put rocks all around it to act as a dam so the soil can't come out. That gave us more soil volume, but yet the plant can still drain past, and the rocks will act as a mulch and hold everything together. I think a water breaker is essential for watering. There's only one person I know, and he is a horticulturist extraordinaire, and he can use his hand at the end of a hose without a water breaker, and he doesn't spill out the soil in a pot. But I've never seen anyone else do it. Everybody else just floods the soil out, and it goes everywhere. I think a water breaker is essential. As I mentioned before, we use an all-purpose fertilizer, a 20-20-20, and we use it at half strength. You can use something similar. There's nothing magic about a 20-20-20. That's just what we use. It's easiest for our fertilizer injector. It's not a big deal, but something similar to that. We use it half strength. Some people may fertilize more, and it's really up to you. We find that feeding twice during the year gives the plants the fertilizer they need without making them grow large and grotesque. Because I'm sure if you've grown many lithops, you've thought, what the heck happened? How did my plant get so big? If your plants aren't getting enough light, they'll grow fast and tall, stretching for the light. This can be compensated for by using grow lights if you're growing them inside. Place the lights 12 to 14 inches above the plants for the best results. If they're stretching outside, you'll have to find a place where you can provide more light. In Tucson, lithops cannot take full sun. They'll sunburn. But in other places, I believe you probably can grow them in full sun. But we also must protect our lithops from rain, because we get rain in the summer when the roots are essentially dormant, and that'll kill them. We have very few insect problems on lithops. We will have cricket problems sometimes, and you'll go out and you'll say, what the heck happened to my plant? And it has something eaten. It's probably a cricket. Lift up the pot, find the cricket, smash it, then your problem's done. If you have spider mites, I would use insecticidal soap or just any lightly soapy water, but you'll find that you need to apply it once a week for 3 weeks in a row to really break the life cycle. For us, birds can be a real problem. In Tucson, we have curve-bill thrashers. They've been affectionately renamed as trashers. They'll come through and they love lithops, and especially if you get young ones, they'll peck, peck, peck. You have to really watch. You have to catch it right off the bat and either cover the plants. We had a customer come in once and tell me she found a really cute antique birdhouse, and so she put all her lithops inside the bird cage so the birds couldn't get in to get them. If by chance your plants get too much water and the surface splits, you can see it's happened in both of these. Don't worry, the plants will resplit. They'll get new bodies the next year, but unfortunately if it happens right after the new bodies have come, it's going to take a little while, and you'll have to just put up with this, and you'll say, next time I'm going to be more careful so I don't let the rain hit them. So another question I'm asked, and this just kind of, well, I try to laugh. People say, what do lithops do? And if I was Miles Anderson, I'd say they do a tap dance, but I'm not. So lithops flower, lithops split, and they give these new beautiful bodies. Lithops clump. Lithops turn into a clump because each year some species, you can see in this picture on the left that one head is emerging, turning into two heads. The following year those two heads can turn into four. They don't always do it. They don't do it every year. Some species will do it more than others, quicker than others. Another thing that people say to me, and I think, oh, really? That all lithops look alike. And I think you have a really boring life if you think lithops all look alike. I don't get it. In this pot of seedlings, you can see that we have numerous different colors of this Lithops salicola. When the new bodies come out, I don't think this looked like the last picture. I don't think this looks like any of the pictures. They're all different. They all have their beautiful character. And that's the best example of them not looking alike, I think. And as I said before, I think Lithops like being close to each other. So what's happening with Lithops today? I can sum it up with one country name. It's called China. China has discovered Lithops. Some people say it's because they live in such tiny places that they need small plants. Maybe so. I like to think they just think they're very cool. Livingstone's Nursery doesn't send plants to China. We're selling seed. For the last 2 years, we've been sent emails asking for 5 million seeds. And those emails are so interesting because they say, we've tried other seed sources and no one can provide that much. And I'm thinking, well, do you know how many plants you have to provide 5 million Lithops seeds? If that's 200 seeds, you can do the math. So they're buying Lithops from everybody they can. For the last 2 years, we've sent just under 3 million seeds to China each year. Interestingly, they keep wanting more. It's kind of mind-boggling to me, but they have a lot of people in China, so I guess. Who knows how long these requests will keep coming, but for now I keep pollinating and I hope for the best. Gene's been known to tell people that Lithops seed is more valuable than gold. Too bad I can't make more seeds. We sell in the capsules because we believe you get better Lithops seed viability if you leave them in the capsules. The easiest way to clean Lithops capsules is to put them in water. And you put them in water, the fruit opens, the seed drops, you drain off the water, and there's your seed. But every time you get that seed wet, it lowers the viability. At first, the people in China just refused, and I refused to clean them because it's unbelievably time-consuming. And so I sent them to them, and I told them how to clean them, and they couldn't believe the germination they got. Probably because they'd been buying seed that had been cleaned before, which lowered the viability. So now they're getting close to 100%. So there are Lithops and then there are cultivars. Over the years I've learned they're collectors and then they're collectors. Personally, I just like Lithops. I love the colors, I love the markings when they split, I love the flowers, and I love the idea that they open and close every day for a week and the petals get longer. I just think that's fun. I love how the fruits have been genetically engineered so that when they open and the right amount of rain comes, the raindrops hit the fruit and it sends the seed out flying. I just find that fascinating. So I guess you could just say I like everything about them, and I guess you could say I'm a Lithops collector. But then there are collectors that need the newest and the best. And fortunately for me, I'm not one of those, but fortunately for me, sometimes I come up with them because we grow so many. So here I'll go quickly through some pictures of some that have been readily available and some that you can look for. Betty's Burl has been around for a long time. Gracilla delidiana, Fritz's White Lady, has been around for a long time, but it doesn't set much seed, so it's rarely available. Fulviceps aurea is often, it's very easy to come by. Lithops Charis montana sumitatum, it's Stephen Hammer said, I don't know where that name came from. It's not really a name. That should be called Lithops Charis montana latericia, but we still call it sumitatum. And you can see I've had some little babies pop up in there, and they're all different colors. Broomfieldii insularis sulfurea is a common one, and it clumps really fast, so that makes it really popular. Here's a new one. Sorry, I left the A off, Dendritica, but this is one that Gerhardt Marx sent me some seed, and it's just a beautiful plant. Another Gerhardt Marx. Another one. These are just really different looking bodies. The name Chocolate Puddles, I bet you can guess that's a Stephen Hammer. This is another actually from a Stephen Hammer collection. And then this Fred's Redhead has kind of a fun story. Because we grow so many, we get lots of different types coming up, and I said, we call Stephen Hammer Mabel, and I said, Mabel, I have these beautiful Rubra brunias that are really, really red. And so I said, I'll send you some. And he said, okay. And next thing I know, he said, we're calling that Fred's Redhead. This is a beautiful Lithops broomfieldii that is one of the plants that Ed Storms had selected. Another pretty Salicola. This is Jane's Red Dog. It's another Rubra brunia. We have our dog's sister lives next door, and she's red, and her name is Julie, but we call her Red Dog. And we thought she was dying of cancer, and I was heartbroken, so I named, this came out of some seed I was doing, and I just said, I'm naming that the Red Dog. And Julie's fine. So, Ember's another Stephen Hammer. Red Flare, another Stephen Hammer. And then probably the creme de la creme is Lithops Acampia Bella Kitty. China goes crazy for this. These are some plants I have sent. And it's kind of nutty to me because I think they're really pretty and I do grow them. But people have told me they've seen them on eBay for $150. And I think that's insane. I don't sell them for that. So now, before I finish, I'd like to offer each of you a copy of The New Growing the Mesons. This was a booklet written by Ed Storm shortly before his death. He was all set to distribute this book in a big way before he died. You'll find that many of the plant names have been changed since this was first published, but I still find it one of the best pictorial references on Lithops you can find. Please take one copy and enjoy it, and I put them on the table there in boxes back by the water. Thank you very much, and I hope you're able to learn a few things about growing Lithops.